So Siddhant, when you also spoke of the alternate payment mechanism, this is very interesting because on the one hand, you have India, which has very good relationships, trade relationships with the US, also the UAE with the recent AI deal that it has struck with the United States. And on the other hand, you have countries like Iran and Russia who perhaps want an alternate payment method so as to enable free trade amongst themselves and sort of contest the sanctions that have been levied on them. So how do you see, how do you see a consensus being reached upon? Like we have discussed how the members, they are not a monolith, they are a varied motley mix. How do you perhaps see a consensus being reached upon in this? And will there be further discussion on it after President Putin's statement about it recently?
Well, let me first give you a brief about how did this idea of the alternative payments mechanism came into being. In 2022, when the war started in Ukraine, Russia was removed from the SWIFT banking system. Now, Russia says it is Western dominated, and of course, because of that, Russia is facing a lot of difficulties. In fact, WION team has been in Russia twice this year, and here we cannot use MasterCard, we cannot use Visa. You need to have cash, whether it's dollar, whether it's euro, or whether it is a ruble. So that led the Russian initiative basically in the BRICS grouping that we need to have alternate payments mechanism. For this, the focus is on BRICS Bridge, BRICS Pay as well, and also conversation on trading in national currencies. Whether there is a consensus or not, the clear answer is there is no consensus within the grouping, because for financial systems to work together, they need to trust each other. The central banks of all the BRICS countries, which as you pointed out is a very diverse set of groupings, whether an Indian central bank will be keen to have a very frank conversation with the Chinese central bank is right now difficult. But India, of course, has been focusing on trading in national currency, and that, of course, is the current view here in the BRICS grouping.
Siddhant, you also briefly mentioned about, the UN not being there. So how concrete is this grouping in concrete, specific terms in the absence of a solid system like the IMF that the UN has? And should a comparison be drawn with the United Nations at all?
Well, BRICS is a grouping which is reflective of the times we are in. We are in times where there is uncertainty, there are conflicts. The optimism that emerged after the end of the World War II in last century, in 1940s, the emergence of institutions back then has faded away, and this is a new world order. Now, the problem is nobody knows who is governing this new world order, because essentially the UN is seen defunct. It has not reformed with the time. The fact that the world's most populated country and the fifth largest economy on the planet, India, is not present at the high table at the United Nations Security Council reflects that the UN is going in a direction which is basically directionless. So essentially, coming to the groupings, there is rise of number of plurilaterals and small groupings like BRICS, whether it is SCO, whether it is Quad as well. In fact, Quad is something that is doing a lot of joint initiatives. And remember, Quad does not has a secretariat. It does not has a legal body. Essentially, it's not an alliance, but still 4 countries are working together. The similar sentiment applies here in the BRICS grouping as well. While BRICS does not has a secretariat, it does not has a central body. The fact that there are coordination between the countries, there are approximately 9 countries who are member of the grouping now, shows that there is a will for these countries to work together. And India and China and Russia together in any grouping, in fact RIC, the RIC grouping together, is a significant grouping. The talks are there to again restart it. So the group, of course, has core as Russia, India, China, the BRICS grouping. So it shows that how this group has got the leverage and has the potential to be a key brick of the world order, the new world order, in fact.
Siddhant, you very keenly read how President Putin was seated between the Chinese president and the Indian Prime Minister. We will speak a little more about what you've been able to gather with how the dignitaries met each other, their body language and the like. But let me first quickly ask you about the isolation a bit on Russia's part that you mentioned. Have Putin been able to establish that Russia perhaps indeed is not isolated?
Well, that's a clear message from day one we all have been talking about. While the West has been saying that Russia is isolated, the sentiment here is quite different. I'm right now in the hall, the media hall, where the world's media, the BRICS countries' media is present in full force. Let me show you the first view of the media center, and that will help you get a view of the number of people present here. The fact that so many people, there's not a single seat left, in fact, to sit. So that shows that how much dynamism is there for the member countries to cover this important event here in Kazan. It is seen as a milestone for Russian diplomacy as well, because remember, after 2022 war that started, there was increased pressure by the West on Russia, and Russia was looking for more friends, more allies, and Asia provided that. China and of course India, two large countries in terms of geography, in terms of population, in terms of their size, are good friends of Russia, is a big boost to the Russian President Vladimir Putin and to Russia as well. In fact, India is one of the largest intaker of Russian energy, Russian oil, and this, despite the pressure from the West, is of course a win-win for India and Russia. For China as well, we have seen positive comments from two sides several times. In fact, yesterday there was a bilateral of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, both with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Today, of course, there will be more conversations at the BRICS Summit as well. So the focus, of course, for Russia, for Moscow, has been to send a message to London, to Washington, to capitals in Europe, that it has allies, especially in Global South as well. There is a significant presence of Global South, leaders of several countries present here, represented as well. In fact, let me talk about the Indian subcontinent. India, of course, is the founding member and naturally is present, the Indian Prime Minister present. But from the Indian subcontinent, there is increased interest by countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan to become members. We really do not know what's the status. Of course, it is a political call as well. But example like Sri Lanka, the Sri Lankan president, the new president, was invited by President Putin to be present here in Kazan. But because of the upcoming elections, the parliamentary elections, he has sent the foreign secretary. She is present here representing Sri Lanka at the BRICS Plus meeting. So increased interest by the world, not only in the BRICS grouping, but increased interest in continuing their engagement with Russia.
Dhant, do tell you, while you did speak about, how the body language of the dignitaries, you very interestingly also showed us images of the media that is present there, which in fact is reflective of if whether or not this is to be perceived as the new world order, what is the extent and the magnitude of it? What can you tell us about the coverage of this particular event as you see around you? Tell us the ground perception around you. How is the world looking at the 16th BRICS Summit?
Well, for that, I need to again show you those visuals and let my camera person show you the visuals of this media center that, of course, showcases the presence of the world's media. Obviously, the member countries' media, but also the presence of other media from other countries. I know the Japanese media is present. I also know that other Western agencies are also present here, and everyone is busy giving out the details about this important summit which is happening. And these images are in many ways for me reflective of a global order, emergence of a new world order where BRICS, of course, plays an important control. There is, of course, wall-to-wall coverage here in Russia. There is, of course, wall-to-wall coverage in countries like China and India as well for the BRICS grouping. And India is committed to this grouping. In fact, India, being the founding member of the BRICS grouping, has always been supportive of BRICS initiative. There are several initiatives, including, of course, initiative on satellites as well. In fact, the emergence of the BRICS grouping started with an analyst from Goldman Sachs coining this term way back in 2001. He clubbed the emerging economies together with acronym called the BRIC, and it was primarily an emerging economies club. It remains that as well, but there is, of course, increased indication of a political stance as well, given the fact that world looks very divided into West versus East, especially after the outbreak of the Ukraine war.
All right. Thank you so much, Siddhant Sibal, our editor for Foreign Affairs at WION. While it is a grouping of emerging economies, as you say, a serious contender, China, giving competition to the United States, two largest economies in the world, perhaps. Thank you so much, Siddhant, for being with us on the broadcast.